Okay, it's time to get started. So my name is Frederick, and in this webinar I will be covering product lab testing, how it works, costs, and also how to deal with failed test results. So this is the same overview that you may have already seen in the invitation email that we sent, but the presentation is divided into four different parts. We will go into start off with an introduction to the topic of lab testing, different types of lab tests, how do you confirm which requirements, testing requirements apply to a certain product, when is testing mandatory, how do you send samples to a testing company, and at what stage should lab testing take place. So we start off with a closer look at the practicalities, and then we move forward to lab testing companies, costs, and basically what you're supposed to do with a test report. So yeah, you'll be something of a lab testing expert after this presentation. So probably familiar with me by now, co-founder of ComplianceGate.com, based here in Hong Kong, and my background is in product development and manufacturing. So I've been working very much hands-on with lab testing for many years now, and in a way that was also a introduction to the world of product safety for me. ComplianceGate.com, as you may also know, we provide software for importers, manufacturers, and Amazon sellers, and also a free knowledge base with, this is outdated by now, but a few hundred free articles on the topic of product compliance. So I'm just about to get started here. You know this introduction by now. If you have any questions, use the you can use the form, and I will respond back to you tomorrow. Okay, not gonna waste your time. Let's get started. So number one, we start with introduction to lab testing. So what is lab testing? And essentially, product lab testing it refers to the process of verifying that a product is compliant with a certain regulation or a standard. Oh, this is a misspelling here, not complaint, should be compliant. Such as ASTM F963, that's for children's products in the United States, or REACH in the EU, which sets limits on certain substances. Now, if the product passed the testing, then this indicates that the product is compliant. So essentially, the act of verifying that a product is compliant and by extension safe, meaning that you can then sell it in a certain market. And what you get from the perspective of an importer or brand owner is this: a lab test report. So you get this document. It could be these days just a PDF file with maybe a QR code for the sake of verification, or a hard copy. And this document then, in a way, serves as that evidence, showing that, okay, you have this silicone feeding bottle and it passed these tests. Now this one is obviously outdated, but just to give you an idea of why do you get a product lab tested, and what do you get out of this. So it's not that it normally does not get registered in a central database or anything. You receive a document and you may need to submit that. Okay, so the different types of lab tests, you can say, and this really comes down to the product. One of the more common that can be essentially applied to any consumer product or any material used to make a consumer product is substance testing. And this means that the facility is checking if the material contains certain chemicals and heavy metals above or below the set limits, and hopefully below. And that's also what we see here. This is a substance test report. Okay, so they are looking at phthalates, lead, cadmium, and so on. And if it's above the limits, then that means the product is non-compliant. Electrical testing, this can be electrical safety testing, EMC, that stands for electromagnetic compatibility, wireless communications for certain frequencies and so on, energy efficiency, etc. Physical mechanical property testing. This is a pretty wide area covering everything from toy safety, more specifically sharp points or small parts that could detach from a product, that could be swallowed. That goes into physical properties or mechanical property testing, and something we're seeing more of, at least as an upcoming area, is stability in certain types of furniture. There were a few horrible accidents a few years back with bookshelves. I think that was in the United States, tipping over on very young children, and fatal accidents. So I'm not sure how far they made it on that, but the standards coming in that area. Then it also covers stability. Flammability testing, okay? I'm sure there are other areas that I couldn't think of when making this presentation, but just to give an idea, different types of lab testing. And of course, ultimately what you subject a product to ultimately depends on the compliance requirements for that product, which in turn depends on the product type. But you may indeed have more than one of these that apply to a given product. So how do you know which tests apply to a product? What should you subject a product to? And my recommendation, at least if you're a smaller business, you're a startup, then you may want to just rely on the testing company to make that assessment for you. When you reach out to a testing company like Intertek or Kima, they tend to be quite helpful in the sense that as long as you let them know, okay, this is the product name, you share a specification, meaning a bill of materials, definitely has to be detailed. They must know which country or market you plan to sell in, the age group, and could be a number of other specifications. Now, based on that, they can then get back to you and give you a list of tests or corresponding standards or requirements that they believe apply to your product in your market for that age group and material and so on. And that can be really helpful. It can even be used as a way to assess which requirements apply to a certain product if you're not qualified, have the experience to do so yourself. And that's often part of them offering quotations. Should absolutely not be abused. You should only request such a list if you're really serious about actually getting a product tested. Just so you know, don't recommend that you bother them by sending a compliance testing list request for like 10-15 products. Okay, option B, and that is essentially that you give a list of standards or required tests that the testing company must follow. Okay, well, or a combination of both. It could be that, okay, you know that your product needs to be tested according to this or that requirement, like REACH or EN 71 part 1, 2, 3. Okay, then don't hesitate. You can definitely inform this to the lab and tell them that, okay, if you're aware of anything else, then add that into your quotation. And this is what it might look like. So you may, once you receive a quote, you may receive something like this, a quotation with a list of tests that this quotation is based on. And they need to provide this because they can't give you a price tag. They can't give you a quotation unless they make this assessment. Is third-party lab testing mandatory, meaning using a external testing company? And let's say that sometimes it's very clear-cut. When it comes to CPSIA in the United States, applies to children's products sold in the United States, then the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, are very clear, if you check the website, that third-party lab testing is mandatory, and not just that, but it must be a test report issued by a CPSC accepted testing company. All the big names, Intertek, BV, SGS, they're on that list, and their respective facilities. Okay. So sometimes it's very, very clear cut, and that's good. That's good for you because then the requirements are clear. Now you take something like the Toy Safety Directive or so-called CE directives in general. Basically, it depends on the directive, but requirement is essentially that you must verify that the product complies with harmonized or non-harmonized safety standards. And although that may have changed, but in the past, most of those directives didn't explicitly say that, okay, lab testing is mandatory, you must use a EU accepted testing company or whatever. Now, in reality though, you need to verify. You can't just issue a declaration conformity based on, oh, well, I guess that this product is safe and compliant. That's not good enough. That said, there could be situations for big brands that have their own testing facilities. They have the expertise in house to actually conduct, say, toy safety testing. That that may be acceptable. I'm not sure if that is acceptable now, but I think for some of these directives is actually like that. So my point here is that it can be more, let's say, ambiguous, giving some leeway to the brand owner, to the importer, to decide how to go about lab testing, do it in-house or some sort of hybrid model. Now, most importers, even fairly large ones, simply don't have in-house testing facilities. And at the end of the day, you must verify. Even though that may not be in writing state, you must verify through third-party lab testing, which is the case with CPSIA. But in the end, it's all the same thing because you need to get it lab tested through a third party, as you don't have your own testing facilities. Okay, but some importers they misinterpret this and decide, okay, well, I'm not going to get it tested then. Another example is California Proposition 65, substance regulation in California, covering lead, phthalates, and so on, the usual suspects, gives you the option of attaching a warning label if you have not verified that the material is not containing restricted substances above the set limits or migration limits. Absorption limits, I think that's the terminology they use. So this is a different, third scenario where, you can decide how to go about it, but then you have another condition and so on. In the end, third-party lab testing is in practice the only way to really verify compliance. Even though it may not always be a case where it is written as mandatory. Okay, when should testing take place? It's a very big question, and it really has a massive impact on the risk, and also, if done the wrong way, you may spend a lot of money on testing that in the end of the day is absolutely worthless, costing you a lot of money for nothing. So if we look at this from the perspective of a product development phase, okay? So phase 1, product development, you will start off by creating a specification or CAD files and so on. Could be for electronics, could be for apparel, doesn't really matter. You will then go into a pre-production phase where your manufacturer or your own factory for that matter produce sample. Now that you have pre-production samples, you could decide to get your product tested at this very stage. Phase 2, manufacturing. Okay, you start production, you go through quality inspection, and then you have a production run. Could be 500 pieces, could be 500,000 pieces. You pick a number of samples randomly from this batch, and this is batch sample testing. So there's two different ways, two different points in time when you can get a product tested. So which option should you pick? Now, this is not something that you can freely decide on. It really depends. So, pre-production testing. Now, the benefit is that, let's say you're developing a new product, right? Could be a new electronic product. Then, pre-production testing, it means that you can verify if the design of the product is safe and compliant before you enter mass production. Often the case for electronics, that's mandatory, really. I don't think any big brand like Apple or HP or whatever, that they would never enter mass production without some sort of assessment before it enters production. They definitely verify compliance at a much earlier stage, although it's not as simple as they send it to a testing company. Okay. Now the thing is that pre-production samples or prototypes are usually not made using the exact same material as at the final product. It could technically be the same. It's 100% cotton, or it's PP plastic, or it's PE plastic, or uh, gold-plated stainless steel. Okay, so it could be the same on paper, but it may not be the same batch, and this really matters. Now you take something like CPSIA, they specifically require batch testing. This means that the testing must actually take place on a sample that is collected from the mass-produced production run. And sometimes that's a requirement. End of the day, you want to verify the product that is placed on the market. That's EU terminology, placing a product on the market, meaning mass producing or importing a product for sale in a certain country. So this really depends, you know. If it's a t-shirt, then, you know, apparel, I would be content as a brand owner with batch testing in most cases, unless I'm introducing a new component like a new zipper or a new button, okay, and I want to test that, then yeah, okay, you may want to test that before entering mass production. But pre-production testing is often necessary when you develop new products, custom design product. We bring a new private label product to the market, and you simply want to avoid a situation when you're mass producing a electrical product, for example, or a toy that is non-compliant by design, because then you are definitely facing a much more severe situation. Okay, product sample submission. How do you deliver samples to the testing company? And basically two options. Option A, you do it, meaning that you already have samples. You send someone to the factory, could be a quality inspection agent, to collect samples for you. So you have this third party, or you go to the factory, or you ask the supplier to send samples to you that you then send. Okay, that's option A. And the benefit is that, okay, you know what's being sent. The other alternative is that your supplier sends a sample, and haven't really had issues, but in theory there is the risk that your supplier will send a sample that is not representing the final product. This has actually happened. Years ago, when I was based in Shanghai, we had a supplier, I think they were based in Yiwu. They sent a PVC for flammability testing, a PVC coated fabric, and yeah, they picked one that was compliant, whereas the mass-produced product was not. This can be hard to identify, even though you get photos, product images in a test report, because testing companies normally they take photos to show, okay, this is what we tested. So for, say, fabrics or materials that can be easily swapped by the supplier, that is a serious risk. So it's good to send someone to actually collect the samples. But if it's something that is a bit more complex, it would be too much effort from the supplier side to try to produce a compliant sample, whereas all the products, mass-produced products, are non-compliant. Can happen, but normally they are not that sophisticated anyway. So yeah, that's a background to these two different options, and why you may need to think once or twice or, well, 3 times before you make a decision. So what do you need from the lab? Well, you need to, number one, get a quotation and a list of tests. This needs to be agreed upon before you send anything. Okay, that's number one. You need a booking number. So when you create an account with, say, Kima, you get a booking number. They call that an LT number, and you need to put that, or the supplier, on the samples. Could be a little paper note, or just write it on the parcel, because they need to be able to identify it. Otherwise, they get a few of these parcels every day. You need the address, and don't just use the address in the email signature that they have or whatever. Make sure that it gets sent to the right facility. Once again, I'm going to use Kima as an example. They have a number of facilities just in mainland China. They have an office here in Hong Kong, but they have one lab in Dongguan, I think one outside of Shanghai, and one in Hangzhou or something. And these are just the 3 I know of. Then they have in the US and maybe something in Europe. So yeah, make sure you send the samples get sent to the right facility. And for sample quantity, how much do they need? That can be tricky. They may need, especially if the different materials. You got a watch, okay, they may need to have 5 watch cases and 5 straps of each color. So that's also something that has to be clarified when you arrange the booking. Okay. so that you or the supplier then sends the correct quantity. Otherwise, you're just wasting time and you have to resubmit. Okay, test results. Now, once you get the test back, and for your information, how long does it take? It could take anything from a week to a month. Actually, 2 months. I think that's the longest. But that was for a medical device, and that one had to be sent all the way from a supplier in Shenzhen to us in Hong Kong, and then to another address in Hong Kong, and they sent it to a lab in the United States to test it according to a EU regulation. Yeah, it's weird, but that's more of an extreme case. I would say on average 2-3 weeks is what you can expect. Anyway, there's two results here essentially, and A, it's passed. That means that it passed the test and it's deemed to be compliant. What does this mean? Well, it means that the product was correctly designed from the very beginning. Okay, it was designed either, well, could be by mistake, or it was a conscious effort to actually design by compliance, something I mentioned in a previous webinar, by the way, to ensure that it's actually designed by the principles in the standards that apply. And when it comes to substance testing, it's ultimately about using materials that do not contain excessive amounts of restricted substances, such as lead, phthalates, and so on. The other outcome is that the test is failed. Okay, and a failed test result doesn't necessarily mean that everything failed. It could mean that one substance test failed, or one safety test failed, or one flammability or whatever failed. But that means that the overall test result is failed. And how to deal with that is something I will get to later in this presentation. Okay. Now, why does this happen? Why does products fail testing? Could be because it's inherently non-compliant. You take a bookshelf. It could be that it's simply not stable. Okay. It could be that you have a toy or a baby product that has a sharp point, or a small part that, well, it's something that can easily be broken off, for example, and hence it is non-compliant by design. It was determined, it was destined to fail testing because it was non-compliant by design. Or it's because the materials contain excessive amounts of certain substances. So these are two examples, the main examples of why they fail. So it ultimately comes down to design and materials. This is what compliance is ultimately about on a product level. Okay. Another thing I want to mention is that there are limits to what you get from a test report or a lab testing procedure. Okay, lab testing is in many cases, I would say in most cases, not the only thing you need to consider from a compliance perspective. So I also want to mention what lab testing is not including. And number one, the testing company does not create your label files, meaning country of origin, CE marking files, etc. They will not, in most cases, issue compliance documents, user manuals, create packaging artwork, or provide design change suggestions if something fails. Okay, it's not like they're going to give you a failed test report and say, okay, you know what, we're going to discuss this with your supplier and come to some sort of arrangement here. That doesn't work like that. Give you the test report, they will not even mention, they will not give you any information on anything else. For that you need a consultant. Okay, so to be clear, you can have a product that is technically compliant and a past test report, but you still need to get the labels right. You may need documentation and packaging information and so on. Okay, so the compliance process is not just about lab testing. Okay, let's look into lab testing companies. So you may be familiar. These are some examples of, well, generally speaking, known to be trustworthy companies. Kima, Test Exchange, that's actually a booking platform, but yeah, they have a very large network of testing facilities that they work with. It's a German-based company. There's also Intertek, British company, SGS, Swiss company, Bureau Veritas, French, TUV, Rhineland, and Nord. It took me a long time before I understood they were separate companies. German, Eurofins, don't know, CMA Testing, that's here in Hong Kong, Chinese Manufacturer Association. So how do you then select a testing company? And number one, perhaps the most important, is are they on a list of accepted companies? This is incorrect. Are they on, not only? Are they on the list of accepted companies? Now, this is not always a requirement, but if it is a requirement, that is number one criteria, because nothing else matters. If, say, you need CPSIA testing and it's a great company, great price, qualified, but they are not on the CPSC accepted list, then it doesn't matter anyway, right? Do they cover your product on the market? Should not be taken for granted. They all specialize to a certain extent, especially when it comes to, let's say, more, well, complex products, could be, say, medical devices and so on. Cost, of course, there is some price difference. There are no cheap testing companies, but there is some price difference to take into consideration. So reach out, get more than one quotation. Reputation, are they known? So a lot of companies that are, let's say, less reputable. Are they ISO 17025 certified? This is very standardized. It's, for most of these companies, almost taken for granted. But it is something that can really be an issue if they are not ISO 17025 certified. I will explain why later in this presentation. Now, something that I see time and time again is, especially importers, that they don't want to deal with this crap. It's boring and whatever. Let's just let the supplier select the testing company. It's very, very risky. Should never do it under any circumstances. And main reason is that if you allow your supplier, your manufacturer, to arrange testing, then you face a situation where the test report will likely be in their company name and with their SKU, not in your company name, not with your product name. That could mean that the test report is already worthless. Okay? And that's a really bad situation, especially as you will end up paying for the testing anyway. They will raise the prices or find an excuse or whatever, or just bill you up front for it. Manufacturers never cover lab testing expenses. Well, unless they plan to use that test report to sell the product themselves, which is not unheard of these days. Second, they may select let's say, a cheap testing company that is not, that doesn't really have a reputation at all, that may not even exist, that may or may not actually test the product, meaning that you could end up unknowingly place a product on the market that is inherently unsafe. Remember, testing is done for a reason, and you don't want to sell unsafe products that self-ignite or explode in people's faces. And number three, you cannot really control if they are making a proper assessment. Okay, what if they are actually booking testing, but they decide, okay, you know what, we don't need to get all of those items tested. We can get some of them tested. We can get, we can test according to this or that requirement, but let's skip that and let's not mention anything to this stupid buyer. Okay, there's no reason. You should never let a testing company book testing for you. I think I explained why. Another question I get frequently is, do I need to get a product tested in the same country that we sell in? Let's say you sell in the US, do I need to get a product tested in the United States? And okay, I'm never going to say never, but in general, when it comes to consumer products, generally speaking, the test doesn't have to take place in the same country or a certain region, as long as the lab is accepted and qualified. Okay? Take something like CPSIA. They require CPSC accepted companies, lab testing companies, and there are many of those based here in Hong Kong or mainland China, Vietnam, and so on. Okay, so just because you're testing for the US market doesn't necessarily mean you need to get it tested in the US. All the major testing companies, they have facilities here in this part of the world, in Asia, because it's faster to submit samples. So that is a benefit of getting it tested in Asia. Okay, lab testing costs. This wouldn't really be an issue if testing was free, but the problem is that it's anything but free. Cost. What makes up the cost when it comes to lab testing? Well, it depends on the product type, depends on the age group, and depends on the number of countries and markets that you're entering, because this in turn decides the number of regulations and standards that apply, and by extension, the number of tests that you need. Second, the number of different components and materials. Okay, each material has to be tested, generally speaking. This means that if you have a product that contains, like a necklace, and it's made of 5 different materials, that's going to be more expensive than a t-shirt made of one single fabric. And it also depends on the material type. When it comes to, say, plastics, PVC, you need to subject some materials to a more stringent testing procedure. So PVC is considered to be more toxic than, say, stainless steel. So let's look at REACH, a substance regulation in the EU. And here we have a t-shirt. It costs $320 USD. And this is a quartz watch that's made up of different components. Okay, so you got leather, you have stainless steel, you even have the glass, and you may even have different steel components made of from different subcontractors. So what I'm showing here is that you have one single material, you have the fabric, and you may also have a care label. That's going to cost you less than a product that consists of multiple different components, different materials that each have to be tested. That takes more time. Because that's really what it comes down to here. It simply takes it's more complex and time-consuming testing procedure for the testing company, so they have to charge more. Another example is electronics. This is different EU directives here. Low voltage directive depends on input voltage. EMC, radio equipment directive, depends on if there's wireless communications, and then we go RoHS, which restricts heavy metals and phthalates in essentially all electronic products. And what I'm showing here is that the testing cost will increase depending on certain functionality. So if you have an electronic device with that can be plugged into the power socket, okay, then this cost must be factored in. Radio equipment, meaning that is Wi-Fi, Bluetooth enabled, then you also have to factor this cost in. So the type of product also has a major impact on the test that the product is subject to. And then there's also CPSIA. This is not really a comparison. This is just to give you an idea. Okay, how much does it cost to test a toy product? And here you can see that this product will be subject to mechanical testing, flammability, and also substances, heavy metals more specifically, all part of the same standard, all under CPSIA. And this is something that the lab has decided. They look at the product, okay, is there a mechanical risk here? Is there a flammability risk? Is there heavy metals could be applied to anything. And based on that, they can then calculate. Here, this is for food contact materials, FDA or 21 CFR. Once again, you can see that this is a product, I think it's a stainless steel bottle, and you can see that, okay, we have a PP plastic part, we have something with chromium, stainless steel, and then it's a sealing gasket. So they have to test all these parts, and there are different. I actually missed that. So we got PP, material A, material B, stainless steel, and material C is silicone. So it's pretty clear that they have to do additional tests for each of these materials. Okay, and in 2 cases also more than one test they have to conduct per component. So there we see testing costs increasing. As it's multiplying based on the number of different components, as I just mentioned. Okay, and these are just some cost examples. You can take a closer look at this if you download the slides from the registration email. Right, how do I reduce testing cost? And well, there are some ways. You can decide that, okay, we can use the same materials and colors on more than one product. Okay, you wouldn't necessarily need to test the exact same material if you use the same material to, for example, use the same plastic to mold different parts of the same product. Okay, then you could maybe, okay, I'm not going to say anything definitive because this has to be decided on a case-by-case basis, but generally speaking, you wouldn't need to test the same material more than once. Okay, now this is for substance testing though. Okay, so if you can somehow streamline your product collection, in any way, then yeah, that could save some costs. Okay. Avoid product changes. If you change a product design, you change material, then you generally speaking have to get it retested again. Okay. Or if you change supplier for that matter, but the same product design, you would need to get your product tested once again. And for that reason, you want to avoid product changes if you want to cut costs. Not that you wouldn't make any product changes for fun anyway, but yeah, it's one way. Another recommendation is don't try to spread too thin. Don't try to don't waste money on getting your product tested in the EU, the US, Australia, UK, Japan, yeah, everywhere all at once, because that's going to cost you. It's multiplying for each jurisdiction or each market, country that you're covering. Okay, and unless you plan to actually launch your product immediately in these countries, then you might just waste your money, because it could be a situation where, okay, I'm going to start with the US, I'm going to launch my product in the EU and the UK and yeah, next year or whatever. So you get it, but you still decide to get it tested now just to have your documents sorted. And next year, by the time that you're ready to launch, it turns out that they have banned a new substance or whatever, so you have to get it retested. So you should get it tested when you're ready to launch in a certain country. Okay. Yeah, option 4, not really, I understand it's not that easy, but avoid certain younger age groups, because for certain age groups, CPSA, for example, small parts are banned. I think it's 0 to 3 years. It used to be that way anyway. Okay, and CPSA testing is mandatory for anything up to the age of 12. Any product for the up to the age of 12. Okay. So unless it's necessary, then yeah, avoid children's products, because for obvious reasons there are stricter testing requirements. Option 5, carefully check your testing quotations. Yeah, testing companies, they can be funny sometimes. They can add items to the testing list that are not necessary. Okay, you wouldn't necessarily need to get, you wouldn't need, maybe not need to subject a quartz watch with a little button cell battery to magnetical compatibility testing, just to give you an idea. But they may quote you that, and they may charge you 400, and if you can't call them out on that, then you may end up paying for tests that you don't actually need. I'm not going to mention any specific companies, but yeah, let's say that we deal with that situation from time to time. I don't really think they have any malicious intent. They have their assessment systems, and if something applies technically, then they will give you a quote. But it's a good thing to have, a decent understanding of the compliance requirements, because that way you can say, okay, we don't think this is actually a risk factor here. Option 6, that could be to use test reports from material or component suppliers. Notice that I'm not mentioning manufacturers here, because as I explained in a previous webinar, about about compliance when importing products from Asia, you cannot, for various reasons that I'm not really going to go into in this webinar, expect to receive test reports even for private label products from the average Chinese or Vietnamese supplier. Simply doesn't work that way. Okay, it's not what OEM manufacturers are supposed to do, but there are situations when you can actually receive test reports from material suppliers. These tend to be brand suppliers. Okay, I used to work a lot with watch manufacturing in Shenzhen, and back in those days, well, it wasn't that long ago, but anyway. Most movements are not made in China. They're actually originating from Japan, Miyota or Citizen or Ronda in Switzerland, and those brands, they are very sophisticated companies. They have test reports. So that meant that, okay, you pick a Miyota GL20 or GL30 or whatever movement from Citizen Miyota, then you could actually get the test report. You could just download it from the website. That meant that, okay, you still need to get the watch case and strap and etc. tested, but hey, you're saving $400 because you don't have to get that. You don't have to get the movement tested. Okay, same thing can go for certain types of, let's say, more sophisticated plastics that you buy straight from granule supplier, battery suppliers, So yeah, sometimes that is actually a good strategy. Doesn't mean that you can completely skip testing, but if you know what you're doing and you have more insight into your supply chain, so that you're actually selecting material suppliers, then yeah, you can actually save quite a bit of testing, and that's also something I encourage you to do, also from a general supply chain management perspective. Okay, test reports. What do you do with a test report? So yeah, you've seen this one. I tend this was just old test report, but it's pretty clear cut. You can see that we got product, and it's all pass. Okay, so yeah, this one is very outdated, very old, but yeah, it still serves its purpose. And what should you do with a test report? I would say the most common is that the test report serves as a supporting document for, say, the children's product certificate. If you know what a CPC is, it's a document you need to issue for each children's product under CPSAA. That's for the United States, by the way. And in it, you have to basically declare that, okay, I am in this company selling. We are importing this product, and the product was tested according to this and that standard, and this is the testing company. So it's all issued based on the test report. So the same thing with the declaration conformity in the EU. It's basically a declaration, just what it sounds like. That okay, we are this company. We are selling this product, SKU ABC01 or whatever. It conforms to this regulation, this directive, this and that EN standard, and this has been verified. And you can see test report 1, 2, 3 for results or whatever. But ultimately, these documents are issued based on the test report. Okay. Another scenario is that you need to actually provide these test reports to the customs authorities or market surveillance authorities, or even individual customers if they request it. Or option C, something that many of our customers have been dealing with, this is Amazon compliance requests. This is one example. Okay, so I think this is, I don't know when it's from 2020 maybe, and this is a compliance request. They're announcing that okay, we are removing your listings for this certain product. I can't remember. It's an electronic product, and in order to appeal, they require that you submit all the relevant test reports issued by an, remember, ISO 17025 certified lab testing company according to the appropriate UL standards to seller support. They don't even tell you what you need to get tested. They expect that the testing company or you should know. Okay, so once again, you see the importance of working with not just any testing company, but a testing company that is certified. Okay. And I think that when it comes to Kima, Intertech, SGS, BV, and so on, they got this covered. Some companies don't. I don't want to mention any specific company, but let's say that there are a lot of mysterious testing companies, test reports that I see on a almost weekly basis. I see new companies on an almost weekly basis, and in some cases, I look at test reports and I don't even know did they actually test anything. When you try to verify the test report, there's no one there. So Amazon will not just accept any test report. This is another request specifically for reach. So this is also what it can look like. They in this case, they reach out and they demand a reach test report. So this is a couple of examples when, okay, it would be really good to have a test report at this stage. You need to arrange lab testing. So what do you do if the lab test fails? And this is something that luckily I'm not dealing with that often. Okay, as long as you manage the process correctly, which of course can be quite complicated, then I would say that it's quite rare that you even have to deal with failed lab testing. But okay, let's look into this. What can you actually do if the test fails? This really depends on what failed. When it comes to substance testing, let's say that, okay, I sent a product for lab testing and it turned out that it contained 2%, it exceeded a few hundred milligrams or something per weight unit of lead or cadmium. Well, maybe I can replace that component. That's the best I can do. Okay. Electrical testing. Now, if it fails that, this implies that it's inherently non-compliant by design. The PCB, the wiring, the casing gaps, whatever. It can't really be fixed, at least not in most cases. Okay, so that could be a real nightmare, a real headache. The other option is physical or mechanical. Well, yeah, the other scenario is physical or mechanical property testing. Likewise, let's say that it's a toy and it turns out that small parts break off. You can't really fix that in most cases. It means that the product is inherently non-compliant by design. There's nothing you can do at this stage. Flammability testing. Then we also come back to materials. And if there's something that you can easily replace, then it could be an option. But let's say that it's a textile product, then you basically have to discard the entire product. So if you face this situation, it's quite rare that you can really do something about it, unfortunately. One example was a few years ago when one of our customers, they had one of these stainless steel bottles, and it turned out that inside of the lid, there was a little plastic piece that contained some substance. So it was fairly easy to just replace the lids, send it for testing again, and then it was compliant because that piece could be removed, replaced. It was a low cost piece, and it was only one compliance issue. It was only one component failed testing. So that could be sorted. But let's say that it's something else. Let's say that it is a power bank, and it turns out that the wiring is not done right, or it doesn't have the right components. And there's nothing you can do. You can't fix that. So once again, this really comes back now to, okay, should I get my product tested before mass production or at the batch stage, or maybe I should get it tested both before and after production? This really depends on the product.